Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Speakers Corner. It's great to see you all here. We've got some pretty stiff competition for this session starting at 12 o'clock, so we're delighted to see so many of you here wanting to talk a little bit about farmer networks, clusters, peer-to-peer learning, and how actually farmers have a lot of the solutions to many of the problems that we're faced with amongst our own peer group. It's just a case of actually unlocking that potential. We're going to hear from three fantastic speakers today. We're going to save all the questions till the very end. So when you do want to ask a question, put your hand up, a mic will appear, and if you could just use the microphone before you ask the question so that we can get good audio for the YouTube recording. So in this discussion, we've got members of the LEAF network. We're going to discuss the importance of farmer-led peer-to-peer networks for sharing knowledge about innovative practices that build resilience, aligned with the integrated farm management principles that form the foundations of the LEAF demonstration farm network and all of LEAF's work going back for the last 30 years. These networks are immensely important at times of unprecedented change, which we'll all agree we're in the middle of at the moment. And this change and the turbulence in British agriculture has not really been seen for a generation at least. So peer-to-peer learning, it's about social learning. It's about learning from each other. It's about being open and trusting and how we can help each other find solutions. So, as Bob Hoskins, those of you of a certain generation will remember, always used to say that it's good to talk, and that's what today is all about. So, without further ado from me, we're going to have just a couple of minutes of introduction from all of our speakers before we get into two main questions, and then the speakers are going to go from there. So I'd like to introduce Alice Midmer, who, if you want to give your sort of full intro, Alice, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Great. Hi, good morning, everyone. Oh, afternoon. I'm Alice, and I work at the Allerton Project. We are a research and demonstration farm in Leicestershire. So we do farming, we do a lot of research into more environmental sustainable practices, and we also do a lot of demonstration through events, visits, and also a lot of training. We've got a stand just opposite the bar, so great spot if you want to come and find out, learn more. But we're also heavily involved in a lot of farmer networks through sort of projects and playing that link between research and farming and getting farmers involved in that. So I'll talk a bit about that later. And also, we're part of the Game, Wildlife and Conservation Trust, and GWCT more widely has really pioneered some of the farmer cluster groups. They're sort of two of the key areas that we work with in networks. Big fan of peer-to-peer learning.
Fabulous. Melanie, would you like to just give a brief intro as to who you are and what you do and where you're from?
Hi everyone, I'm Melanie Wright. I'm a Knowledge Exchange Manager for Rothamsted Research. So Rothamsted Research is a sustainable agriculture research institute. We're the longest running one in the world, if longevity is something to be proud of, which hopefully it is. A lot of you might be aware of our site not far from here, so our main campus is at Harpenden. But I actually work down at our Devon site, which is just off the northern edge of Dartmoor, near Oakhampton, where we do grassland livestock research. So we have a beef and sheep farm there. I'm going to be really talking today about the perspective from research of how we can work with farmer networks. And we do interact with a lot of them. We host a lot of them on our site, but we're also part of several networks as well.
Fantastic, great introduction. And last but not means least, Nick.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Down. I am a farm manager down in West Berkshire. I manage a farming business on behalf of a farm management company called Velcourt. We manage farms right the way across the UK and also have been involved in farms across Europe and Africa as well. Our farm business at home, we are a combinable crops farm. We're about 2,000 hectares of cropping. We've also got a significant area in countryside stewardship and looking at lots of exciting projects going forward. We're also part of a local farmer cluster group. I will go on and speak a little bit about our network of our farm management company, a little bit about the LEAF network that we became part of just over a year ago. and probably talk about some of the challenges that we've sort of learned and some of the lessons we've learned of being involved in the farmer cluster group.
Fantastic. And just a brief introduction from me. We farm on the Gloucestershire-Worcestershire border. We're a leaf demonstration farm, have been since 2012. Leaf is really at the core of how we run our business in terms of integrated farm and integrated pest management, arable and sheep farm, and heavily involved in leaf activities, have been for a while now. So great introductions, wide depth of knowledge here. So please think up some great questions, try and extract those little nuggets towards the end of the session will be fantastic. Try and think about some things that you can take away and apply to your own businesses back home as well, and how you can get involved. So being involved is really important. So Alice, first, if you could just kick off, how are you involved with the farmer networks, and why do you think they're an important sector for agriculture?
Great, thanks very much, Jake. So yeah, I think farmer networks are really, really crucial to, as Jake said, this real seismic shift that's happening at the moment. For me, you get networks at different scales, and they really bring sort of different benefits within that. So sort of local, really local, regional, and national. So I was just going to talk a little bit about how I see it from that perspective. So firstly, local, so farmers working together in a really specific local area. And the exciting thing here is about sort of cluster groups and the real expansion of this as an idea, as a concept, as a way to make change. And GWCT has a lot of experience in these. Quick shout out, I don't actually run one, so I spoke to my fantastic colleague Megan Locke, who runs two down in Hampshire, where GWCT are very active. So within that, there's lots of physical benefits with working together with people within your local network, in terms of what you can achieve, and also the opportunities that sort of come your way as a unit. So in terms of achievement, looking at things like biodiversity, so actually people in a local area being able to have a greater effect than the sum of their parts, that actually you're looking at big habitats, big landscapes where biodiversity can recover. And similarly with water and catchment scale change and that sort of aspect. Another thing that Megan really picked out was about monitoring. So this is a real challenge, how do we track change and what we're doing? And Megan's comment was she's got some fantastic farmers who are doing that for her, who are really engaged. And she talked about being able to do 120 hedgehog tunnels in 3 weeks because all the farmers had got involved and got doing them themselves, which allows her to focus on some of the more difficult things to monitor or things to recognise. So when we're talking about benefits to the industry and all of the stuff that's happening, actually getting people engaged at that real granular level can bring a lot of benefits. In terms of the opportunities it brings as well, that those farmers in Hampshire are getting involved in something called the Environmental Farmers Group, which is becoming a company that then becomes attractive for environmental trades like biodiversity net gain, carbon trading, that kind of thing. And by working together as a unit, you're sharing that risk and perhaps uncertainty around this new area. And then for the people buying those things, you're also a more attractive proposition because of the scale of change that you can make. And even on a smaller scale, just people working together, already active in this space for projects and research and funding, that becomes quite attractive. So that's sort of looking really locally. Then regionally, there can be real great benefits of working with farmers who have similarities to you, maybe similarities in business, what you grow, but you're not right next to each other. You're not right in the same community. So an example of this, at the Allison project, we're working on a project called Climate Neutral Farms, which is 10 wheat farmers in the east that all supply the Nestlé supply chain. And they're looking at what climate neutral practices they can adopt over the next 2 years and what that looks like. So there's so much in that you can learn from each other with similar challenges but different soil types, and a real sort of fast learning. One of the big challenges with particularly arable farming is you can learn one thing in 1 year, and then you have to wait till the next year to try something else. Whereas if you're in a network of people, you can learn 10 things in 1 year. And how can we harness that to greater benefit? But yeah, you're also looking at people there who are trying new things. So actually working with people who aren't right next door looking over the hedge might be quite beneficial as well. So what we're doing in that is it's about arranging lots of visits. We've been to 2 of the farms already, having joint training, so thinking about what those farms are interested in and being able to be effective with where we deliver that, and also advisors coming as part of that as well. And then my last point was just about national networks or further afield. I also think there's a real benefit with having networks of people who are involved in the industry but perhaps totally different sectors or different viewpoints, and actually having people to come in and challenge what you're doing and why you're doing it. So a big shout out to the Worshipful Company of Farmers, who do some fantastic leadership courses. I've been lucky enough to do the Challenge of Rural Leadership, and I know Mel has as well. And the way they run those courses is 18 people, and because of the way they run them, and also encourage you to have reunions, you leave not just with one mate, but with 17. And I'm sure Jake would say the same about things like Nuffield, and the Institute of Ag Managers do a lot of those kind of brilliant broader courses, and the Leaf Network's another great example of that. So that's just when I was asked that question, sort of a little bit about how I think about those benefits. That's me.
Brilliant, thank you, Alice. Just sort of from my notes there, in terms of some of Alice's key points, landscape and monitoring change, that's really important for us as farmers and land managers. Working together, better than the sum of the parts, which again is really important. And in fact, you can learn 10 things in 1 year. I got a job to remember one thing in 1 year, let alone 10. So there's obviously things to work on there, but really important. Thank you, Alice. Mel, same question to you, please.
Yeah, so like I say, I'm kind of coming at it from the perspective of research institutes, which I appreciate, if you're an individual farmer, might not seem like the easiest organisations to engage with. And I think this is where there's real benefit of being part of a network and having that critical mass, like Alice says. So from my perspective, a lot of the networks we work with just in themselves are very engaged groups. They're sharing learning, they're sharing ideas amongst themselves, and they're often very hungry for more knowledge. So they're a really great network. They're a very great group for us to work with. It's very hard for us to engage at the level of an individual farmer, but it's much easier for us to engage at the level of a network. And we do that in a variety of ways. So, we're constantly hosting networks at our sites, both here in Hertfordshire and also down in Devon. But we're also looking for opportunities to work directly with those networks. I've been very fortunate over the last couple of years to work with a group of 6 other farms down in Devon who've set up the Devon Silvopasture Network. So they've all looked to integrate more trees onto their farms. And this links with a kind of broader agenda that we're seeing in research, which is trying to encourage more farmer-led innovation. So an organisation like Rothamsted, we get our funding from the UK research councils. We get ours from the one that funds biotechnology and biosciences research. So that can be quite fundamental research. There can be quite a gap between what we're doing at Rothamsted and how that might be translated on the ground for you as farmers. So really, working with networks gives us an opportunity to take some of that research out of the institutes and see how that works on the ground. That can be in a variety of ways. So we've had a number of programs at Rothamsted where we've gone out, we've done experimental work on individual farms. And what that allows is it allows us to kind of scale out the research we're doing. So if you come to one of our sites and we tell you the results from research we've done in Devon or in Hertfordshire, that's applicable to that soil type, to that geography, to that management system. So going out and extending our research onto real-world farms allows us to get a much broader range of farm types, climates, management systems represented, and it allows us to use our understanding in kind of fundamental science to explain why we might be seeing variances in metrics of interest like yields or biodiversity, for instance. We also do it slightly differently. So we've got a big program that's just started in collaboration with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And instead of going out and setting up experiments on farms, what we're doing is we're looking at those farms as unique experiments in themselves. And that's a much more observational way of doing research. So collecting data from those farms, and this is at a very large scale. We're trying to work with 40 or 50 farms, and then a wider network of farms that will feed in through kind of citizen science approaches. And we're not prescribing how they're going to farm. We're working with farmers across a range of management practices, a real gradient of management practices. And by collecting that data, we can start to explain the variance that they're seeing on their farms. And I guess, last of all, we really see that value in kind of sharing knowledge, sharing experience, so learning together. We learn as much by working with farm networks as we hope they learn from us. So it's very easy within a research context to miss some of the broader application, to miss some of the blinkingly obvious that you might be experiencing when you try and implement these things on their farm. So yeah, our experiences of working with farm networks has always been as enriching for us, and we hope it's beneficial to the people that are in those networks as well.
Super, thanks, Melanie. So, we're talking about engaging with more people, more collaboration, something that farmers aren't always great at, let's be honest about that. Reaching a wider audience and obviously learning from each other. So Nick, can you tell us a little bit about how you're involved in farmer networks and why you think they're important to our sector?
Yeah, I guess I've kind of been in a very fortunate position for most of my farming career, working for a farming company that sort of farms right the way across the UK, with a network of people that we're exposed to on a regular basis. I've always had the opportunity to be able to get together and share, not only what we do well, but also what we're not doing so well, and probably what we're getting wrong, and being able to use that knowledge together. That if one person gets something wrong, we all learn from that mistake very quickly, and we don't all make the same mistake. I've been really, really lucky that I've been involved in that sort of framework for 20 years, and quite honestly say, I've been spoilt to be able to do that. It's been a massive help to my learning as I've gone through my farming career, and I like to think that the new entrants coming into farm management now, get exposed to that group experience really, really quickly early in their careers. I think to sort of build on that and to challenge myself in different ways, I got involved with a program with Leaf about 3 years ago to make a journey to become a part of the Leaf Demonstration Farm Network. And I wanted to challenge myself in sort of slightly different ways to what I was doing as my day job, the general production of the farming business. I wanted to sort of really challenge what we were doing, from a sustainability element, particularly from a habitat and biodiversity point of view. And I felt being involved in that network just challenged me in completely different ways from what I was what I'd become used to, what I'd become accustomed to. So it allowed me to sort of keep pushing those boundaries a little bit further, and always aiming to achieve more. And then sort of back to a local level in what we do in our area. We have a reasonably small farmer cluster group of 9 farmers, all in our local area. We sort of started off our journey at the sort of onset of COVID. So our first year, generally most of our meetings were held via Zoom. But sort of incredibly, in that atmosphere or that environment that we all got used to, actually what you could achieve by people getting together and literally discussing some of the things that we were doing and some of the challenges we had, trying to help with some of the answers. And I think, that's been quite unique in farming terms for a long time. We're very quick to point out what's wrong over a hedge, but very rarely do we get together and say, actually, we've got a solution to that problem. And I think the industry is sort of really changing to that way of thinking, really, really quickly now. It does comes with some challenges. It's not easy. And I think like many farmer cluster groups, we're all looking for that magic project we can get stuck into that's going to, hopefully deliver us a little bit of added extra income. But I think why we don't have that in place, we never stop getting together, maybe talk about some of the smaller issues we've got, and where we are making some small gains. And I think the one thing that's really, really good with that, it also brings in a slightly competitive spirit. So when someone has something good to report, you almost want to go out and see if you can beat that and come up with something better. It sort of really drives those levels of ambition between us. Bearing in mind there's only 8 or 9 of us. We have to work pretty hard if we want to try and outdo our next door neighbour. But it really just makes us go and think and look at things a little bit differently. So I've kind of got 3 ways that I've been exposed to networks across my career. And again, they all challenge me in completely different ways.
Brilliant, thanks Nick. I like that sort of competitive spirit side of things, especially if you're sort of talking barn owl chicks or meters of pollen and nectar. It's a real satisfying kind of addition to the day-to-day farming aspects of things, which is important. For us at Overbury, Leaf has, as I said earlier, played a huge role in what we're doing. The thing I like about being involved in Leaf is the positivity. Whenever you go to a Leaf meeting, a demonstration farm meeting, or Resilient and Ready, or Beacons event, the positivity in that room is always off the scale, which for many other meetings that I go to is not the case. Positivity is really important in agriculture, and as I said earlier, we have challenges at the moment, but we need to find solutions. We've talked about how we can do that, but the positivity is really important. Networking is also hugely important for us, not just within Leaf, but actually outside of Leaf, within the industry. So we're working quite closely with Agri-EPI, looking at engineering, precision and innovation solutions. We're working with supply chains, Kellogg's, Molson Coors, and actually that's all part of that wider group of people that you can have a conversation with. And then if you take things online, we've got lots of different WhatsApp groups. We've got a drilling WhatsApp group. We've got other platforms, Trinity's global global farming pioneers is also another great way. Boffin's another brilliant way to communicate and share ideas. And then at a local level, we're involved with FWAG quite a bit in terms of cluster groups, which have been mentioned before, but we've got the current Catchment Restoration Project, which is a really good way of accessing funding through government and through commercial partners. It's also helping our wider environment, the wider landscape, looking at how we can train ourselves up in terms of tree planting, hedgerow management, water capture, scrape making to improve our farmland bird habitats. And also, I guess, being in a position of the sort of influence and the go-to people that are seen in the industry that might be able to help some solutions and pass on some expertise to other members of our communities. So for us, it's about long-term. It's about long-term relationships, long-term approach, and it's about the people as well. People are hugely important, and whenever you go to cluster groups, that positivity, that personal connection is really important. Outside of Leaf, Nuffield, Alice mentioned it earlier on, has been a huge influence, and the global perspective that you can call upon is so important. I can remember not long after my scholarship started, I was in a conversation about slugs with a scholar in Canada, a scholar in New Zealand, and me. And this was in the middle of the night one day, depending on the time zones. Middle of the night one day probably doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean. That to me just said an awful lot about communication and how farmers need to talk to each other to help find these solutions. So communication is absolutely vital to what we're doing. So we're going to move on with another question now in terms of the future, really. We keep talking about change. Groundswell has come a long way in the sort of 7 or 8 years that it's been running in terms of the numbers, the scale. Hasn't lost any of its sort of feeling of sort of community. That's really important. But we are looking to the future. So I'm going to start with Alice, really, in terms of what more can be done to support these farmer networks and how can farmers, growers, academics, how can everybody get involved to try and find these solutions?
Great. Yeah, and I think that's the key thing. We've established that we all think they're brilliant. So how can we do more to promote them? And for me to do that, you've got to slightly understand the challenge with them. And as a great friend of ours used to say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Which is very, very true. The very loosely hidden meaning in this is that if you want to go together, it's not particularly fast, which can be very, very true. And you do require, if you're setting up, start a new network, a lot of front-loading of time, energy, money to get going. And as Nick said, to find that magic project or that magic thing that people really want to work together to do. Because a network is only a network if people actually know each other. Otherwise, it's just a random group of people. And that getting to know each other doesn't happen immediately. And in and of itself, it doesn't achieve anything. But it is a crucial gateway to some of these other bits that happen and that are fantastic. That social trust, that having a bit of fun, that part of it is really, really important. So in that Climate Neutral Farms project that I mentioned, I spotted Neve at the back there, who is very, very busy at the moment because we're right at the beginning of that network. We need to decide what we're doing, and that doesn't happen by just sitting on our own and thinking about it. It happens by doing, by getting out there, by having events, by having chats in the middle of the night about slugs, by doing soil tests and biodiversity assessments. And all of that takes time and money. So in terms of how do we get more of these things going, there is an element of that kind of, having to spend time, money doing that, and that trust that people that are setting up those networks hopefully know what they're aiming at, rather than all just going to the pub for the sake of it. The other thing is good people to do that. The amount of times you hear the key to a good network is having a good facilitator is a lot of times. And it's so key in that sometimes it's someone slightly independent but with a lot of energy and really trying to get that going. So they're the kind of things that we need. We've got things like the facilitation fund that is set up to do this, but that can be quite limited in terms of the flexibility of the funding, which has led a lot of the GWCT clusters to be self-funded, which again, lots of farmers are really, really happy to do once they know there's a benefit, once you've got going. But how do you get more of those networks to that stage? And then you asked about getting involved in those. From a farmer perspective, it's really crucial, coming to things like that, finding out what's involved, what's happening in your area. And I think it is quite patchy. So from my experience with my work hat on, I often, with lots of networks, you sometimes find yourself talking to similar, same farmers who are involved in lots of things. But I live quite near here in Cambridgeshire, and actually there's not masses right where we are to get involved in. So it's, but there's more needed, is my thing there. And then from a researcher point of view, great to hear what Mel was saying about how to build it into the work. And that would just be my plea, to really build it into project work sufficiently and seriously. It's not just an add-on that research is being done and then we'll tell some farmers about it. It can really be a core part of the work. Now, it was really interesting to hear about actually studying farmers for what they're doing, not trying to shape what that is to your own plan, and really value that involvement. As you said, Mel, it's important that farmers get you're getting as much out of it as farmers, so you really need to value that kind of, researchers need to value that kind of input, particularly at that beginning stage, as I say, because it takes a bit of time to get going, so really valuing that is quite key.
Brilliant. So we know that research needs to be valued by everybody, and the more of that conversation that we can have, the better. Also, like Alice's point there about the social side, don't underestimate the benefit of farmers getting together over a pint or a glass of fizzy wine or whatever. That's really important, and that's things that I think sometimes get overlooked. We're looking at business all the time. We need to do this, we need to do that. But actually, farmers looking after their mental health, having a conversation together, and it might be something about how the cricket's doing. I don't know the answer to that at the moment. They're about an hour in, I think. But it's that sort of conversation that's really important. So, but Melanie, let's move back onto the topic of the day rather than anything else. What more can we do to support our farmer networks?
So I guess the good thing is that the tide is changing, and I think there are some really good schemes out there that are helping farmer networks to engage and research more. So obviously we are part of the LEAF network. We're a LEAF Innovation Centre at both our Northwick and our Hertfordshire sites. And what that means is that we are part of that wider network of demonstration farms and other innovation centres. So we can share knowledge amongst that network. We also call on that network to get involved in particular projects that we're doing. So being part of that LEAF network or other networks, that's a really good opportunity for us to to make those engagements, to try and find those projects. Like Alice is saying, we need those vehicles to work together. Unfortunately, it's quite hard for us to get out to go and engage with every network. So it's great if we can really build some projects together that are of benefit both to research and to the farmer groups. We're also involved in another couple of schemes. So the Innovative Farmers Scheme, which is all about pairing networks of farmers who have shared interests around a particular issue or topic with a researcher to do some on-farm trials. And we've done a number of those, and those are great because those are addressing research questions that have come directly from the farmers themselves. There's also the new Farming Innovation Programme, so this is a joint UKRI DEFRA funded programme, and they've added on to that a research starter grant, which is really for those farmers who are looking to start their journey into working with researchers, and that provides funding to work together initially for 1 year. And that's a very nice application process. It's quite easy to access. You do a video of yourself to begin with your research question, and we've been able to do a number of projects that way, working with farmers around a number of topics. But there is challenges. Both of those funding schemes that I've just talked to you about. Those are single-year schemes, and they're quite small pots of money. And as we know, it takes a long time to build trust, to find those commonalities, to develop projects that are mutually beneficial. And when we parachute in and we can only work with you for a very short amount of time, maybe that doesn't lead to the best, most longest lasting benefits for both. So I guess one of my pleas is that we need, we need opportunities for research to engage more with networks outside of specific funded projects. We've got this wealth of academic knowledge in this country. We really are globally recognized for our research in this area. But how do we tap into that, and how do we use that expertise? So yeah, we do need more funding, more support, both for farmers and on the research side, so that they can have those engagements, they can work together. It needs to be over a much longer time period as well. Just doing things for one field season is quite limited. You obviously want to be doing that over a much longer period of time. And I think, just picking up on some of the points that Alice said, from our perspective, what works really well is when there is that overarching buy-in and commitment from those networks. So the Devon Silvo Pasture Network that I mentioned earlier, this was a scheme a network which came about really through the interests of the individual farmers looking to do something novel on their farms, looking to implement new management. And they were the ones who brought the network together, and we've been really privileged to join it. And from my perspective, I've been able to dedicate more time to that than I have other projects. And it's a lot of those social elements, like you were talking about, Jake. We have a WhatsApp group. We're able to meet at the different farmers, meet on different farms, and actually really get to know each other. And that lays a much stronger foundation for building projects, which we've been able to do on top of that network. And I guess another plug just for an organisation like LEAF, what works really well for us, you say coordination is really key. is working with those organisations that already have a lot of those expertise, already do that strong coordination. We're not going to be able to do that within research institutes, so we really rely on those organisations out there. Leaf, agroecology, Soil Association, there's some really great examples out there of organisations that are really galvanising farmers around particular topics. And for us, they've been really, really worthwhile to engage with.
Thanks, Melanie. Just a couple of points there. On the silver pasture, you're dead right. Annual funding is great, but when you're talking a project like that you need to research that from anywhere from 0 to 10, 15 years probably. So we're looking at things over a long term in agriculture, and that's a challenge to get that funding tied down for that amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, there really isn't funding available at the moment for very long-term projects, and I'm sure a lot of farmers have been frustrated in the past by being involved in projects, and then it gets to the end of 3 or 5 years, and then that kind of support disappears. So that's why I guess pump priming networks is really important, but eventually they have to be self-sustaining. People have to be able to kind of see the value in being involved, and for an organisation like our own, we can set up networks who we go out and we do work with through particular projects, but those may not be self-sustaining in the long term. So that's why for us it's better for us to go out and work with those networks that already exist, that have those kind of overarching aims and kind of a shared commitment to a kind of particular topic or challenge.
And just briefly, you mentioned the research farming grant there. How do we get hold of that if anybody's interested in the audience, just while we're on that point?
So the Farming Innovation Programme, I think it's a new 7-year programme. They've already had one full year of it, and I think it's in the 2nd year now. So they are regularly opening those calls. If you go and put into Google Farming Innovation Programme, there's a lot of support available from Innovate UK for people to apply to that. And I would say that's a really nice kind of first step. You don't necessarily want to jump into a huge project instantly. That's a really nice opportunity to kind of dip your toe. And similarly for the Innovative Farmers Programme, that's been running very successfully now for 10 years. And there's even if you're not directly involved in one of their field trials, you can go onto their website, and there's a whole wealth of information there that's been gleaned from these farmer networks that have been running for 10 years plus now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And finally, over to Nick, really. What are you, in your views, can be done to help support more farmer networks?
I think I'm going to pick up on a point that sort of Alice mentioned when she was speaking, and very similar to what we found if we look specifically at our farmer cluster. The key to making it really work is that person who's there to lead it for you and to drive it. And I think sort of speaking to a number of different farmers, finding that person is quite challenging to get that real sort of driving force with that sort of effervescent energy to try and drag a group of farmers together, sort of kicking and screaming to do the next big thing is hugely challenging. So I think trying to attract those right people to be able to do that is one of our key challenges, and probably what's sort of stifling a lot of farmer clusters and really driving those forward to deliver good things. So a little bit of a plea, if anyone from DEFRA is listening, a little bit more flexibility in the facilitation fund would be absolutely fantastic, to be able to just support those guys who are in pretty short supply at the moment, to get them to be able to help get those farmer groups off the ground, and in some cases, they do need to be helped individually. Everyone is on a slightly different path and at a different stage of where they want to get to. So, if that can be funded through a facilitation fund with a bit more flexibility, that would be absolutely fantastic. I think, in terms of challenges of how we drive this forward, I guess we're not on this journey alone. There are lots of partners involved in everything that we're trying to achieve as farmers and as land managers. if we could really start to join some things together a little bit more, get some different sort of partners involved in some of these groups, so we really all truly understand that the challenges that we've got, I think that would really, really help just to build sort of knowledge of what the challenges are. As we're all learning, moving to a new system is quite different, quite challenging. And there are lots of different ways of doing this. So that wider engagement, and that a little bit more support for farmers to get involved, I think would be a massive help to get that involved. And I think for any farmers out there that are doing something, it's not necessarily about how big you are, how many acres you can amass. It's about just getting things together and doing the basics first. Just that conversation of why you're doing something in one place and how that can be joined up just over the hedge. There really are lots of really easy wins out there at a local level to make things better, make things more joined up. So those basic conversations are really, really key to making it work. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in a formal arrangement. As Jake said, and I can guarantee this happens in our cluster group, those conversations sat around a table having a pint, just happen organically as to how that works. So, that sort of key, as important as the formal time is, the informal time is equally important to making things, making these things work really, really well. So I guess the support through the facilitation fund again a little bit. I'm not saying DEFRA should be supplying farmers with pints of beer to get them to do stuff, but that sort of flexibility and funding of how these things work. Everyone will deal with this in a different way. There is no sort of set pattern. So I guess my key messages are people. We need more of these sort of key facilitators. We're really, really lucky that we've got someone that can kind of deal with us and drive us. I don't think she's here, so I can say it. Yes, she's at the back. Deals with the frustration of having to sort of drive farmers forward, getting them to do things on time. It's a pretty onerous task. So these people are really, really key in sort of getting this to work. And I think we talk to all the successful farmer cluster groups. They will all say that person is really the key to their success. So people is number one, flexibility is number two. And I think the partnership's getting more people involved. We've been quite lucky again that we sort of started to build a little bit of relationship with the University of Reading, which is sort of next door to us. And again, it's being able to bring in some different interests, people who want to look at specific things. They're helping to guide us. They're helping us to measure and quantify. Some real easy wins. So I think any sort of learning bodies out there that can help support these guys, and we can start having some more of those conversations and help each other. We've got lots to offer as well. The more we can do that, I think the more that can really help support. So some quite easy wins, I think, being a reasonably simplistic person.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. So, brief summary there: flexibility, people, and partnerships really, really important, and I think that's a message that's come through for everybody. Right, we are moving on to the questions session. There was a microphone coming down. If we could just pop to the front here, that would be great to start with. Then we've got a rash of questions. I love it. We'll start with this lady at the front here.
Hello, yeah, it is working. I'm Emily Williams. I work for Bushire Wildlife Trust, where we have a facilitation fund, which I agree could be more flexible. So part of my question is that currently through facilitation fund, you can't offer necessarily advice, which would be great if individual advice for farmers could be funded through DEFRA to do that, but also to upskill those maybe with ecology backgrounds, with agriculture, but maybe through basis courses to expand the workforce to deliver on the ground. And yes, I agree that working in partnership is of benefit. So about 4 days a week, I help deliver the Severn Trent grant schemes. So through the facilitation fund, we have about 20 plus farmers, but in my Severn Trent work, that expands my kind of work base to 600 plus, along with my 2 colleagues in that particular catchment, where we can link them up with all sorts of other funding than the Severn Trent work. So, for example, in my area, we've got a treescapes thing.
Sorry to interrupt. That's some great stats there.
Yeah.
Absolutely love them. Can you just come
So
to
it's
the question, because there's about 4 people
that's
waiting to
fine.
ask now.
So it's basically about funding to deliver advice through facilitation funds and to expand the workforce to do so.
Okay, so we're looking at how do we fund more advisors on farm. I guess the Alice at the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust would be a great place to start with that.
Let's hope so. So, yes, I agree with the advice. And part of that is because it's another part of that thing, get something going. It encourages farmers to see what the value is, what's on their farm, what could they improve. You know, how do you know what you want to do if you don't know what you've already got? So that is a big part of the GWC to cluster groups, that they provide that advice, because as I say, a lot of them now are self-funded. So, and that's how we do it, is that self-funding advice to provide that. And also, would echo that on the upskilling front, because we run the Certificate of Sustainable Land Management course at Allerton, which is the basis course as part of the diploma, and it's really brilliant fun to teach, because we get wildlife advisors, we get farmers, we get agronomists, and lots of other types of people exist also, and they come, and it's how we really design it to get people to learn from each other. Everybody in that room knows more about one part of the course than I do, which is terrifying. But it's basically about how we can share those learnings and get the wildlife advisors with that really crucial knowledge come to understand about the farming, to put it into context. So I agree. I don't know if that helps, but I agree with those points.
Yeah, no, Basis also do some environmental consultancy certification as well, which is
they have
is good.
The register, the Environmental Advisors Register. So now if you do that course that I mentioned, you get on the register, which is great. That's the end.
Brilliant. Lady in the green.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Tucker. I'm from the Green Finance Institute, and my question is specifically about environmental markets and environmental trades, which, Alice, you mentioned the Environmental Farmers Group quite early on about how they're exploring that space. And I wanted to ask, because this is such a nascent area for farmers to wrap their heads around, do you think that environmental markets and trades could be a topic that catalyses farmer clusters to work together like the EFG? And if so, what kind of support would you think is useful for farmer clusters to really forge ahead on exploring whether those trades are right for them and what that entails?
Sorry.
Alice, yeah, good question.
Yes, so I think they are great, because they, from farmers' point of view, they share the risk. So as you said, you used a very fancy word, which I think means sort of new, and it's a very uncertain market. So when you talk to farmers, and I'm sure there's loads of talks here today about selling BNG or carbon, and it's just you hear it, the Wild West terminology being thrown around. So by doing it together, you're spreading that. So I think that becomes really attractive, and equally for people coming in, it's attractive. In terms of advice and what's needed, it's some of those, farmers can deliver fantastic, brilliant things, but sometimes it's also new. So how do the finances of that work? What's the makeup of the company? Having lawyers involved to help kind of facilitate that without crushing it before it started, because that's the balance. If you get too boring too quick, everyone switches off. So I think that's from that perspective, I think that would be a good part of it.
I was just going to add to what Alice was saying. So we have a large number of farmers, unsurprisingly, coming to us at Rothamsted at the moment, fairly panicked around the topic of carbon, because, like Alice says, it is a bit of a Wild West out there at the moment, and they're not quite sure, which schemes, which direction to go in. And I would say one of the most valuable things that you can do is to forearm yourself with the kind of information that you want to ask these organisations. So, if you are more informed on the topic, you are going to be able to make much more informed decisions when you're interacting with those companies. And my colleague John Storkey, who's got the Rothamsted hat on in the crowd, uses the term kind of principles, not prescriptions, when we're talking to farmers. And by engaging with research, we can share some of that kind of fundamental understanding around these topics. We're not going to go and tell you which one of these schemes to go and sign up to, but we're certainly going to share our learning so that when you're talking to them, you can make much more informed decisions about what might work for your farm, and challenge some of those claims potentially that are being made by some of these companies.
Lovely, thanks, Melanie. Question here in the blue, and then we'll take the gentleman in the sort of green spotty jumper. You must be really warm.
Hi, Matt Griffin, Benson Weems Farms in Scotland. Jake, great to touch on the mental health thing. Let's not underestimate this. When we're in these peer groups and these networks and at these sorts of things, it's very easy to feel that the change in front of us is easy. It's certainly not, and at the same time we're asking guys to change their systems and maybe move away from heavy inputs, and with those heavy inputs comes people on farms selling you fertilizer, selling you feed, whatever that might be, and they become your friends, and if we're in a lonely place and we're changing and we're losing that interaction with people, we need to have support as part of everything that you were talking about.
Yeah, really, really great question, and I think that even if it's WhatsApp groups that are just putting photographs on, just talking in the pressure of the season, I think is really, really valuable. Could you just have the question just in here with the gentleman with his hand up? That'd be good, and then we'll go to the back, the gentleman in the blue shirt, then, and then we've got some over this side.
Hi, my name's Tom Scroop. I just had a quick question about, we work with a few farm clusters and came across groups through the Game Conservancy, had a good list on the website. Is there any way you know of kind of for people wanting to work with clusters, where to find out clusters in your area, or to know, where they are, who to get in touch with?
Really good question. Nick, do you want to add a little bit of light to that one?
Yeah, and funny enough, when we were preparing to do this, that exact topic came up, that again, we kind of started doing that, and so many clusters are formed, we kind of haven't kept up. So I think it was something that was definitely we were going to look at trying to be able to do between us to get that back up together. And I think it kind of highlights some of the issues, sort of picking up on the previous question, is actually there's a little bit of a communication problem with sort of farmers on one side and investors on the other side, and exactly how we start to try and get those conversations going and shorten those links. So yeah, absolutely, if we can identify ourselves a lot better, we might be able to do it on our local level, but actually starting to look a little bit more ambitious. So yeah, great question, something we definitely need to address.
And I think also, as well as being able to identify what clusters are out there, a better mechanism for clusters to be able to share learning amongst one another. So, for instance, in this Devon Silvopasture network, we're looking at how we can develop kind of farmer-friendly biodiversity monitoring techniques. But, you start, even in the meeting that we had before this session, a number of apps got mentioned. And for every farm group to have to go through that process of discovery, trialing, it would be great if some of that heavy lifting could be done, and that knowledge shared amongst clusters, so that everyone isn't kind of having to start from nothing and do those trials themselves.
Almost need a facilitator cluster.
You need a facilitator of the facilitator of, probably a couple of other levels.
Brilliant. We'll go to a question at the back, and then we've got a question just here at the front.
Question for Nick and Jake. How is working together adding value to your business, please? The bottom line.
I think probably making less mistakes. Let somebody else make them, and then they'll tell you what not to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what it probably also promotes is that, more opportunities for collaboration on things we may have done 20 years ago, but we've kind of gone away from doing. So, things like sharing equipment, pooling together resources. The more you become accustomed to working with your neighbours, the more those conversations happen, where we would have probably looked at things in isolation. So I think that's probably one of the quick wins that we saw quite quickly, is actually, if you can pull some things together, then you start making definitely some savings quite quickly.
Brilliant, thank you. Question from the front here.
Thank you. Hi, it's Anna Reynolds, and I work for the AHDB. And I think you've really touched on this between Tom and Nick and Mel. My question was, you've mentioned a lot of different networks already, and there are a lot around the UK. Maybe not quite enough in some areas, but there are a lot, and they're doing great work, and some of that work does overlap. In your view, what's the best way for the networks potentially to come together between themselves to share some of the learnings and make sure they're not fragmenting the landscape?
Good question, and one I spend a lot of time thinking about as well, because people often identify with certain, if you engage and inspire someone in a particular group and a particular concept, like regen, for example, that's really, really taken off. So sometimes by bringing everything together, you lose that excitement. So that, I suppose, I'm not quite sure I've got that across but yeah, that it's not always about pooling everything, I don't think. Like, it's not about having the same network available everywhere, if you see what I mean. So I think it's, as you say, Anna, it's how do the people running those learn, to Mel's point, to learn more together. And there has been some efforts at this, like I think Innovative Farmers ran a facilitation workshop for facilitators. And there was a conference which I'd at Farm Ed, I think, last year, which looked absolutely brilliant. So I think more initiatives like that to share it, because it's really not a competitive space, and I think that's what is great. So you're a step ahead of lots of things where actually there's a bit of tension, whereas with this there isn't. So I think there's a lot of scope to do that. I don't have quite the answer how, but I think it would be great fun. So I'm in.
Nick, go on.
Yeah, I think it's something we're looking at in our part of the world. We're in the North Wessex Downs AONB. And again, how do we join together the next level? Obviously that's not going to work in every part of the world. I think probably what we also might see, and maybe an opportunity, counties having, a local nature partnership, and a strategy in the background. Hopefully that will allow things to be a little bit more joined up, in that local area. Bearing in mind, we're Berkshire, we're a long, thin county, and I think we sort of border 5 or 6 other counties. So again, there'll be that sort of cross-reference as well. So I think that, a couple of examples that I think may help to join some of these things up when we're looking specifically at habitat, nature, biodiversity, etc.
Thank you very much. We've got a few minutes left, so we've got a question here, and last question, lady at the back with the denim top on, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Susie Dealey from REBI. We know that Farmer Network works. We know that sharing knowledge. We know that peer-to-peer experience is absolutely crucial. These are very challenging times. We've touched on mental health and well-being, and how getting to people together is an absolutely essential part of this. I wondered how much the well-being actually features as something you consciously think about in the networks. It's also a plug to say that mental health support is a big area of work for us. We are able to provide free counselling to anyone within the farming community, but also training is very important. Mental health training, which we can provide funded places for, as well as organisations. So if anyone is interested, mental health training at rebi.org.uk. It is really important that people have the skills to start those conversations. So please do contact us.
That's a really good plug. I don't mind those ones at all, because it is so important. So do make a note of that website and have a look. From our facilitation funds, we haven't really got into that mental health side of things yet, but I think it's part of that whole story, and that will become more and more prominent as people start talking about it. And as an industry, we are actually getting to grips with that now. So we've got one last question there, and then we'll be wrapping up.
Hi there, Emily Aitchison. I've just started a farm cluster up at Deben in Suffolk, and we were turned down for the facilitation fund from DEFRA. I think it's quite an interesting time, because I think actually a lot of clusters are applying and there just isn't the money there. So a quick funding question, just about any pots of cash. We've approached Anglia Water, FIPL, Local Trust, Nestle, but are there any pots of cash that anyone knows about? We've got a fantastic facilitator who's ready to go, and I think we all need to look at alternative routes of funding, because DEFRA is a bloody nightmare when it comes to the forms. We want more flexibility and freedom, and there is pots of cash out there. So has anyone got any ideas? And just over there, we've got I'm part of the Norfolk and Suffolk cluster group, and we represent over 100,000 hectares in Norfolk and Suffolk in cluster groups. So we've come together as 2 counties.
I think that's a really good place to end, and perhaps you two can get together at the end. We'll come and have a little chat up here to find out exactly why that didn't get over the hurdle, and then we can move on from there.
We are appealing.
I think really in summary, we are running short of time, but I've only got one sentence really. Farmers can deliver fantastic things. We can deliver even more when we work together. I've really enjoyed the session. Thank you, Alice, Mel, Nick. Thank also to the lady that's running around with a microphone because she's pointing out all over the place. Enjoy the rest of Groundswell. Thank you for your participation, and have a great day. Thank you.